Out of all the figures in biblical history, only two ever completely bypassed physical death. One of them is Elijah. His earthly life ended by being pulled into the sky by a chariot of fire and a massive whirlwind. But his spectacular exit is almost matched by how he arrives. He steps into the historical record with zero backstory. He simply walks into the royal court of King Ahab and casually announces that a devastating drought will strike the kingdom, and it won't rain again until he decides otherwise. Israel at this time was deep in a cultural vacuum. Ahab's wife, Queen Jezebel, had imported hundreds of prophets devoted to the false god Baal. Altars to the nation's historical faith were being systematically replaced. Once the drought begins, Elijah disappears. He hides in the wilderness by a small stream called Cherith. He survives entirely on wild ravens, who bring him bread and meat every morning and evening. When that stream finally dries up, he is sent to a destitute widow in a town called Zarephath. She is preparing a final meal for herself and her son with her last remaining bit of flour and oil. Elijah tells her to bake for him first, promising her supply will hold out. She does, and her jars miraculously never run dry for the rest of the famine. These opening events frame Elijah as an untouchable insurgent. He appears out of nowhere, commands the weather, is fed by wild birds, and defies state corruption. He looks like the ultimate lone superhero. 3 years into the drought, the land is cracked and desperate. Elijah returns and challenges the king to a massive public standoff here on the slopes of Mount Carmel against 850 state-sponsored false prophets. The parameters of the challenge are straightforward. Each side will build an altar and prepare a sacrifice. They will pray, and whichever deity answers with literal fire from heaven is the true God. The prophets of Baal go first. For hours they dance, shout, and violently cut themselves in a desperate frenzy. Absolutely nothing happens. When it is Elijah's turn, he shows supreme confidence. He repairs a broken altar, places his sacrifice, and then has the entire structure and the deep trench around it completely flooded with water 3 consecutive times. He doesn't shout or dance. He speaks a simple, quiet prayer. Instantly, a massive column of fire strikes the altar. It incinerates the sacrifice, the wood, the stone, and completely vaporizes the water in the trench. The people fall to the ground in terror. At this exact moment, Elijah has single-handedly humiliated the state religion and conquered the empire's theology. He is at the absolute apex of his public power. Then comes the immediate reversal. Instead of surrendering to this display of power, Queen Jezebel retaliates by issuing a terrifying, specific death threat against him. And the man who just stood alone against an army of false prophets entirely loses his nerve. He panics. He runs for his life, fleeing deep into the desolate desert valleys. Exhausted and terrified, he collapses under a small desert tree and gives up. The previously fearless prophet explicitly prays for his own life to end. Years of isolation and the sudden drop from a massive adrenaline peak have finally reached a breaking point. His body and mind are simply overtaxed. God's intervention here is deeply gentle. There is no scolding. There is no fire from heaven. An angel simply provides him with warm bread and a jar of water and allows him to sleep. God meets Elijah's spiritual despair with physiological care. This recovery phase highlights that escaping despair often begins with basic nourishment and rest. Once he recovers his strength, Elijah travels to Mount Horeb, the very same dark, rugged mountain where Moses encountered God centuries earlier. He is told to stand on the mountain. Suddenly, a chaotic sequence of natural phenomena begins. A terrifying wind shatters the rocks. That is followed by a massive earthquake, and then an intense fire. In the wake of this destruction, there is a strange void. God is not in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. Despite the scale of the display, the power is empty. After the chaos subsides, there is silence, and in that aftermath comes a gentle whisper, a still, small voice. That is how God finally makes his presence known. In that whisper, Elijah receives a new perspective. He learns he is not actually alone. 7,000 faithful people remain in Israel, and he is given a new mission.
Go back and train a young man named Elisha. The exhausting spectacle of Carmel cannot sustain a prophet forever. That strength comes instead from the quiet, intimate reassurance found in the whisper. Elijah completes his earthly mission, handing his responsibilities over to Elisha. And then he steps into that swirling whirlwind, carried upward by horses of fire, leaving his successor to carry on the work. His historical gravity endured long after his departure. Centuries later, he reappears on the Mount of Transfiguration, standing alongside Moses to speak with Jesus. Elijah's journey moves from explosive fire through a total collapse in the desert, and finally into the healing quiet of a whisper. Have you ever experienced a crash after a major personal victory? Share your thoughts on finding rest in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe.